Episode 135, The Phantom Time Hypothesis. Were 3 centuries of history fabricated? Welcome back to the Conspiracy Theory Analyst. I'm Robin. What year is it? You probably answered 2026 without hesitation. But according to the Phantom Time Hypothesis, a theory proposed by German amateur historian Herbert Illig in 1991, you would be wrong. The actual year, Illig claims, is closer to 1729, because approximately 297 years of history were never actually happened. They were fabricated, invented by a medieval pope and a Holy Roman Emperor who wanted their reigns to coincide with a symbolically significant year 1000 AD, and who orchestrated one of the most ambitious deceptions in human history to make it so. Tonight we examine a theory that is, by the consensus of professional historians, archaeologists, and astronomers, completely wrong, and yet remains genuinely interesting, because the questions it raises about how we know what we know about the past are not entirely frivolous. Detailed Explanation. Herbert Illig is a German publisher and amateur historian who published his central argument in a 1996 book titled Das Erfundene Mittelalter, The Invented Middle Ages. His core claim is this: the period from approximately 614 AD to 911 AD never occurred. The events, the people, and the documents from those 3 centuries were fabricated after the fact by a conspiracy centered on Holy Roman Emperor Otto III and Pope Sylvester II, who were determined to place their own reigns at the millennium, the year 1000 AD, for religious and political prestige. In this reading, Charlemagne, the dominant historical figure of the period, the man credited with unifying much of Europe and establishing the Carolingian dynasty, never existed. His biography, his court, his wars, his coronation by the Pope on Christmas Day, 800 AD, all of it invented. Documents describing his reign were fabricated. The architectural remains attributed to his era were misattributed. The entire early medieval period was, in Illig's telling, a grand theatrical production performed for posterity by a conspiracy of medieval scribes. His evidence included what he described as gaps in archaeological evidence from the period, architectural inconsistencies in the development of Romanesque style, calendar discrepancies in the transition from the Julian to the Gregorian system, and what he argued were suspicious features in medieval documents. Core elements of the theory. The first element is the archaeological gap argument. Illig argued that the physical remains attributed to the early Middle Ages, the buildings, the artifacts, the coins, were unusually sparse compared to both earlier Roman remains and later medieval material. This sparseness, he argued, was consistent with the period never having existed rather than with a genuine historical dark age. The second element is the calendar discrepancy argument. When Pope Gregory XIII reformed the Julian calendar in 1582, the accumulated drift between the Julian calendar and the solar year required an adjustment of 10 days. Illig argued that if the Julian calendar had been in use since its introduction by Julius Caesar, the drift by 1582 should have been 13 days rather than 10. The missing 3 days in his calculation corresponded to roughly 297 years of fabricated time. The third element is the Charlemagne mythology argument. Illig pointed to legendary and hagiographic elements in Charlemagne's biography, the religious embellishments, the miraculous episodes, the symbolic narrative, as evidence that the figure was more myth than man. He also noted that the documentary record of Charlemagne's court came largely from later copies rather than contemporary originals. The fourth element is the grand conspiracy claim. Illig proposed that Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII coordinated the fabrication, directing scriptoria across Europe to produce centuries of false documents, manufacture false archaeological remains, and sustain a deception that has fooled historians for 1,000 years. Evidence against the theory. The evidence against the phantom time hypothesis is not merely substantial, it is overwhelming, and comes from multiple independent sources that Illig's theory cannot account for. The astronomical refutation is the most decisive. Solar eclipses are mathematically predictable events whose occurrence at specific dates and locations can be calculated with precision across thousands of years. Medieval chronicles record specific solar eclipses and describe them with details, the location of observers, the time of day, the degree of totality, that match the independently calculated astronomical record for those dates. If the years 614 to 911 never occurred, these eclipse records would be inconsistent with astronomy. They are not. They match perfectly. Dendrochronology, the science of dating events and objects using tree ring sequences, provides a continuous record that extends far beyond the alleged phantom period without any gap. Tree rings from European oaks record climate patterns continuously through the period Illig claims was fabricated. There is no interruption. The Eurocentrism problem is decisive. The phantom time hypothesis, even if it could be sustained for European records, cannot account for the independent documentary and archaeological records of China, the Islamic world, India, and the Byzantine Empire, all of which record continuous histories through the alleged phantom period, in documents produced in languages and scripts that European forgers would have been unable to produce convincingly. Chinese astronomical records, Islamic chronicles, and Byzantine imperial histories all record events from the 614 to 911 period in ways that are internally consistent with each other and inconsistent with fabrication. The calendar discrepancy that Illig cited, the 3 missing days, has been explained by historians of mathematics as a simple error in his own calculation, not evidence of phantom time. Arguments in favor believers in the theory argue that the scarcity of early medieval archaeological remains compared to Roman and high medieval material is genuinely anomalous, and that the conventional explanation, the disruption of the post-Roman world and the general poverty of the period, is less satisfying than it might appear. They also note that document forgery was a documented practice in medieval Europe. The donation of Constantine, a famous document purporting to grant the Pope authority over Western Europe, was exposed as a forgery by Renaissance scholar Lorenzo Valla. If one major medieval forgery existed, others could too. They also find the concept of medieval scribes as the primary transmitters of historical knowledge genuinely concerning. The chain of custody between original events and surviving documentation is long enough that distortion is not impossible. Arguments against historians note that the phantom time hypothesis is not simply a claim about document forgeries. It requires the fabrication of the physical universe itself. Solar eclipses happened on the dates medieval chronicles recorded them. Tree rings grew in the years Illig claims were phantom. Ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica record climate events, including the 775 AD cosmic ray event, a spike in carbon-14 levels recorded in tree rings worldwide, with a precision that places exactly where conventional chronology predicts it. The conspiracy required is not of medieval scribes, but of the laws of nature. The stars, the trees, and the ice sheets would all need to have been part of the fabrication. Public opinion and broader impact, the phantom time hypothesis has a surprisingly large online audience, particularly among people interested in alternative history who find the conventional early medieval period genuinely puzzling. Its relative documentary sparseness compared to later periods does create a sense of historical shadowland that the theory's dramatic explanation exploits. It has also generated legitimate academic interest, not in the specific claims, which historians universally reject, but in what the theory reveals about how historical knowledge is constructed, how we distinguish authentic from forged documents, and why some periods of history feel more real and more legible than others. Conclusion: were 3 centuries of history fabricated? The astronomical, dendrochronological, and global documentary evidence says no, emphatically and specifically. The years 614 to 911 AD occurred. Charlemagne existed. The early Middle Ages happened. For believers, the documentary sparseness of the period and the general possibility of medieval forgery create enough uncertainty to sustain the theory. For historians, the physical evidence of the universe itself, eclipses, tree rings, ice cores, closes the question without ambiguity. What is certain is this: the phantom time hypothesis is wrong. But the question of how we know what we know about the past and how much we trust the documents that tell us is one worth asking regardless of the answer. This is the Conspiracy Theory Analyst. I'm Robin. If tonight's episode made you think, please rate and follow on Spotify. Tomorrow on the Conspiracy Theory Analyst, is the U.S. government suppressing free energy technology? That's next.